The galaxy had never been kind to humanity. From the moment humans left their small blue world and reached for the stars, the older species watched them with cold eyes. The Galactic Conquered, an alliance of 12 ancient civilizations, saw humans as nothing more than clever animals who had learned to build ships. They were too loud, too curious, and far too ambitious for a species so young. Ambassador of the Dominion remembered the first time she met a human diplomat. He had smiled at her, extended his hand, and asked about her family. She had found it disgusting. Her people did not smile. They did not ask personal questions. Humans, she decided then, were a mistake the galaxy would eventually correct. That correction came on a day that would later be known simply as the Silence. It happened without warning. Earth went dark first, then Mars, then every colony, every station, every ship that carried human crew. In the span of a single hour, 8 billion humans across 47 worlds simply stopped existing. There were no explosions, no battles, no cries for help echoing across communication channels. One moment humanity was there, loud and alive and reaching ever outward. The next moment they were gone. The Galactic Conquered received the news with something close to relief. High Chancellor of the Empire raised his glass during the emergency session and proposed a toast. No one objected. The humans had been a problem, and now the problem had solved itself. Volunteered to lead the inspection team to Earth. She told herself it was scientific curiosity, but part of her wanted to see it with her own eyes. She wanted to walk through the empty streets of the species that had annoyed her for so long and confirm that they were truly gone. Her ship entered Earth's atmosphere on a gray morning. The planet looked the same as it always had, blue and green and wrapped in white clouds. Beautiful, she admitted to herself, though she would never say it aloud. The humans had been given a beautiful world and they had spent their short history fighting over it. Typical. The landing team touched down in a place called Kansas, had studied human geography, and she knew this was what they called the Heartland. Flat fields stretched to the horizon, golden with crops. The wind moved through the grain like waves on an ocean. It was peaceful, too peaceful. They found the first town after a short flight. It was small, the kind of place humans built when they wanted space to breathe. Houses sat in neat rows along quiet streets. Cars waited at intersections with their engines still running. Doors stood open. Meals sat on tables, still warm when they arrived. Walked through it all with growing unease. She had expected destruction. She had expected bodies or at least signs of struggle. Instead, she found a world frozen in the middle of an ordinary day. A cup of coffee sat on a porch railing, steam no longer rising from its surface. A dog's leash hung on a fence, but the dog was nowhere to be found. Children's toys lay scattered in yards, waiting for owners who would never return. Her team searched every building. They found nothing. No humans, no remains, not even a trace of whatever force had taken them. It was as if an invisible hand had reached down and plucked every man, woman, and child from the surface of the earth. In one house stopped before a refrigerator. Someone had covered it with small pieces of paper held in place by colorful magnets. Most of the papers were meaningless to her, schedules, lists, notes in human handwriting she could not read. But one piece caught her attention. It was a drawing made by a child, simple shapes in bright colors. A stick figure family stood beneath a yellow sun. A mother, a father, and 2 small children. They were holding hands. Stared at the drawing for a long time. She waited to feel something. Sadness, perhaps, or guilt, but nothing came. These creatures were gone and the galaxy was better for it. She turned away and continued her inspection. The pattern repeated across the planet. Cities stood empty but undamaged. Vehicles waited on highways for drivers who had vanished mid-journey. In hospitals, patients had disappeared from their beds, leaving behind only tangled sheets and beeping machines. In schools, classrooms sat silent, books open on desks, lessons half-finished on boards. The investigation teams found something else too. In every city, on every continent, strange symbols had been carved into the ground. They were large, some of them hundreds of meters across, cut deep into concrete and stone and earth. The symbols pulsed with a faint light that made equipment malfunction when she got too close. No one could translate them. No one could explain where they had come from. The same symbols appeared on Mars, on the moon colonies, on every human world they visited. Always the same message in the same unknown language, always glowing with that strange, impossible energy. Included the symbols in her report but dismissed them as unimportant. Whatever technology had taken the humans was beyond current understanding. Perhaps they had destroyed themselves. Perhaps some ancient weapon had misfired. It did not matter. The result was the same. The Galactic Concord declared human space open for annexation 6 months after the silence. The Empire claimed Mars and its valuable mining operations. They took the outer colonies. The Sown people claimed Earth itself, though they had no immediate plans for it. It was a trophy, nothing more. Proof of their superiority over a species that had risen too fast and fallen even faster. Within a standard year, humanity was erased from the official star charts. Their history was reduced to a single paragraph in educational databases, a cautionary tale about the dangers of expansion without wisdom. Their art, their music, their literature, all of it was archived and forgotten. The galaxy moved on, returned to her duties, and did not think about the drawing on the refrigerator. She did not think about the coffee cup on the porch or the toys in the yards. She told herself that humans had been a minor inconvenience, nothing more. Their disappearance was a gift. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, she saw those glowing symbols. She heard a sound like distant thunder, felt a pressure in her chest that she could not explain. And deep in a part of her mind that she refused to acknowledge, a question formed that would not go away. Where did they go? 30 years passed before the galaxy learned the answer, and when they did, they would wish they had never asked. 30 years was a long time for most species in the galaxy, long enough to forget old fears, long enough to grow comfortable with stolen worlds and borrowed power. The Empire had done well for itself since claiming Mars. The Red Planet's resources had made them rich, and wealth had made them bold. Prime, was a planet of towering cities and endless industry. 17,000 warships orbited above its atmosphere, a defensive network that had never been tested because no one was foolish enough to challenge it. They were warriors. They had built their civilization on conquest, and they believed that strength was the only truth that mattered. It was an ordinary morning when the sky began to hum. The sound started low, so low that most people did not notice it at first. It felt more than it sounded, a vibration that moved through buildings and bones and the very air itself. Workers in the factories paused. Children in the learning centers looked up from their lessons. Soldiers in their barracks reached for weapons they could not name a threat for. Then the sky tore open. It was not an explosion. It was not a weapon anyone had ever seen. Reality itself seemed to fold back like a curtain, revealing something beyond the normal darkness of space. Light poured through the opening, light that was too bright and too warm and somehow alive. A figure descended from the rift. He was human. That much was clear from his shape, from the way he moved, from the face that had no breathing mask or protective suit. He wore simple clothes, the kind farmers wore on Earth before the silence. His hair was gray, his face lined with age, but his eyes burned with the light of stars. General Orr was the first to give the order to fire. She commanded the orbital defense network from her position on the primary battle station, and she did not hesitate. Whatever this creature was, it had invaded her space. It would die. Plasma fire rained down from the warships above. Kinetic rounds designed to pierce fortress walls screamed through the atmosphere. The figure should have been vaporized 1,000 times over in the first second alone. Instead, he continued to descend, walking on air as if it were solid ground, his expression calm and almost sad. The barrage intensified. Every ship in the network opened fire. Antimatter warheads, weapons banned by Galactic Treaty, were launched in desperation. The sky became a storm of destruction aimed at a single point. The figure walked through it all. Explosions bloomed around him and faded. Energy beams bent away from his body. The most powerful weapons in the arsenal struck him and dissolved like morning frost. He did not slow. He did not even seem to notice. He reached the surface and stood in the central plaza of the capital city. Citizens fled in terror, but soldiers held their positions. They fired their personal weapons until the barrels melted. They charged with blades when their guns failed. The figure raised one hand, and every weapon on the planet crumbled to dust. Then he spoke. His voice was quiet, but every being on Prime heard it clearly. It rang in their minds in their own language, a voice that allowed no misunderstanding. My name is Ben Carter. I was a farmer from a place called Nebraska on a planet called Earth. I grew corn and soybeans. I had a wife named and 2 sons who made me proud. I died peacefully in my bed at the age of 91, surrounded by the people I loved. That was 33 years before you celebrated our disappearance. General Or stood frozen on her battle station, watching through a display screen. The figure looked up, directly at her, as if he could see her across the thousands of kilometers that separated them. You divided our worlds like spoils of war. You erased our children from memory. You mined our planets, harvested our resources, and called it progress. We gave you 30 years to remember us with kindness. We watched. We waited. We hoped you might honor what we left behind. Ben Carter lowered his gaze and looked around at the terrified city. You chose differently. He raised his hand again, and General Or watched her entire fleet fold in on itself. 17,000 warships, the pride of the Empire, collapsed like paper. They did not explode. They did not burn. They simply ceased to be what they were, twisted into shapes that hurt the mind to look at before vanishing entirely. The process took less than a heartbeat. We are not here for revenge, Ben Carter said. We do not want your deaths. We want you to understand what you did. We want you to remember us, not as a footnote, not as a warning, as the people we were. He walked through the city, and everywhere he went, weapons turned to ash. Tanks, fighters, guns, bombs, every tool of violence that had built over centuries of warfare dissolved at his approach. When he finished, Prime was untouched but defenseless. Its people were alive but humbled in a way they had never experienced. Ben Carter stopped at the edge of the city and looked up at the sky. This is only the beginning. Others will come. Every world that profited from our absence will be visited. Every species that celebrated our end will face the same choice. Remember us truly, or lose everything you believe makes you strong. He vanished as suddenly as he had appeared. The rift in the sky closed, leaving only normal stars and a silence that would haunt them for generations. On Earth and every former human world, the strange carved symbols finally revealed their meaning. The glowing text shifted into words that every species could read. We have not died, we have become. News of the Prime incident spread across the galaxy within hours. The Galactic Concord called emergency sessions. Scientists struggled to explain what had happened. Military leaders demanded answers that no one could give. But the message was clear. Humanity had not been destroyed. They had not fled. They had transformed into something beyond normal understanding, something that could unmake armadas with a thought and walk through weapons fire like rain. And they remembered everything. General Or resigned her commission that night. She sat alone in her quarters, staring at the empty space where her fleet had been, and tried to understand what she had witnessed. A farmer from a dead world had just destroyed the most powerful military force her people had ever built. Not with anger, not with hatred, with sadness. That was what frightened her most. Ben Carter had not been angry, he had been disappointed, and somewhere in the back of her mind, a thought formed that she could not escape. What else did they remember? What else had her people done that the humans had watched and recorded and prepared to answer for? The galaxy was about to find out. The Galactic Conquered had not called a full assembly in 300 years. There had been no need. The 12-member species had long ago learned to manage their conflicts through smaller councils and careful diplomacy. But the events on Prime changed everything. Representatives from every civilization gathered at Axis Point, a massive station built in neutral space for exactly these moments. The chamber was designed to hold thousands, and every seat was filled. Fear had brought them together in a way that common purpose never could. High Chancellor of the Empire stood at the central podium. He was old now, older than he had been when he raised his glass to celebrate humanity's disappearance. His hands trembled as he addressed the assembly. "We face an unknown threat," he said. "A single human destroyed the entire military in minutes. We must unite. We must prepare. We must." He stopped mid-sentence. A woman had appeared beside him. She had not walked through any door. She had not transported in. One moment the space was empty, and the next she stood there as if she had always been present. She was human, middle-aged, with kind eyes and graying brown hair. She wore a simple dress, the kind a teacher might wear in a small-town classroom. Guards rushed forward, their weapons dissolved before they could raise them. The woman held up a hand, not in threat but in greeting. "Please," she said, "I have not come to hurt anyone. I have come to explain." Stumbled backward, nearly falling from the podium. The woman steadied him with a gentle touch, and he felt a warmth flow through him that made his fear seem very far away. "My name is Moore," she said. "I was a school teacher in Oregon. I taught third grade for 27 years. I loved my students, my garden, and my husband who made terrible jokes that always made me laugh. I was 64 years old when I vanished with the rest of my species." She looked out at the assembled representatives. Thousands of aliens stared back at her with a mixture of terror and desperate curiosity. "You deserve to know what happened to us. You deserve to understand why we have returned. But first, you need to understand what we learned about you." Raised her hand, and images began to form in the air above the assembly. They were memories, pulled from somewhere beyond normal space and projected for all to see. The first image showed a human colony on a world called Seven. It was a peaceful settlement, families building homes and farms on a new world. Then warships appeared in the sky. The colonists had no weapons. They raised their hands in surrender. They fired anyway. Watched his own soldiers murder 7,000 civilians. He heard the screams. He saw children running for shelter that would not save them. He felt the heat of plasma fire on human skin. The image shifted. A research facility hidden in deep space. Human prisoners strapped to tables, subjected to experiments that served no purpose except to satisfy curiosity about how much pain a human could survive. Recognized some of the scientists. She had worked with them. She had approved their funding. More images followed. A secret vote among the conquered leadership to sterilize Earth before humanity could spread further. The plan had been abandoned only because humans expanded faster than expected, making it logistically impossible. Not morally wrong, just inconvenient. Attacks blamed on human aggression that were actually false flag operations by conquered members. Trade deals designed to keep human colonies dependent and weak. Assassination of human diplomats who came too close to uncovering the truth. The images faded, leaving the assembly in stunned silence. "You called us aggressive," said softly. "You told your people we were dangerous animals who could not be trusted, but we were not the ones planning genocide. We were not the ones experimenting on prisoners. We were not the ones murdering colonists for land we had no right to claim." She paused, letting the words settle. "We did not know most of this when we were human. We suspected, but we could not prove it. Now we know everything, we see everything, and we remember everything." A delegate found his voice. "What happened to you? How did you become this?" Smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the teacher she had been, patient and kind, and ready to answer a difficult question. "We were approached by beings older than your galaxy. We call them the architects, though they have no name that any spoken language can capture. They exist outside normal space and time. They have watched countless civilizations rise and fall across billions of years, and they found something in humanity that interested them." She walked among the delegates as she spoke, and they parted before her like water. They saw how we struggled, how we suffered, how we made terrible mistakes and learned from them. They saw us crawl from caves to build cities. They saw us split the atom and choose not to destroy ourselves. They saw us reach for the stars even when the universe pushed back against us at every turn. Stopped before. The ambassador sat frozen in her seat, unable to look away. The architects offered us a choice: transcendence or extinction. They said that the conquered's plan to destroy us would eventually succeed. Within 300 years, humanity would be hunted to the last child, but they could give us another option. They could lift us beyond physical form, beyond death, beyond the limits of flesh and time. She touched cheek gently. Every human who ever lived, from the first ones who walked on Earth millions of years ago to the children playing in those yards you inspected, all of us were elevated together. We exist now in a place your mathematics cannot describe. We see across time as easily as you see across a room. We understand every thought, every choice, every secret shame and hidden kindness in every being we encounter. Felt tears running down her face. She did not know her species could cry. "We did not come back for revenge," said to the assembly. "We came back because you need to understand what you did, not so we can punish you so you can become better. That is all we ever wanted, a chance to live, a chance to grow, a chance to share the stars with neighbors who did not want us dead." She returned to the podium and looked out at the gathered representatives one final time. Ben Carter showed the what happens when you build your identity on violence. Their weapons are gone. They will have to find another way to define themselves. That is not cruelty. That is opportunity. High Chancellor found his voice at last. "What do you want from us?" Considered the question. "We want you to remember us, truly remember us, not as a threat, not as a mistake, as the people we were, the farmers and teachers and artists and parents who loved their children and dreamed of a better tomorrow. We want you to look at what you did to us and understand why it was wrong, not because we will punish you if you do not, because understanding is the only path to becoming something worthy of the stars." She began to fade, her form becoming transparent. "Others will come, every crime will be answered, but the answer is not death, the answer is truth. What you do with that truth is your choice." More vanished, leaving behind an assembly of thousands who would never see the galaxy the same way again. And somewhere in that crowd finally remembered the drawing on the refrigerator. The stick figure family holding hands beneath a yellow sun. She understood now why it mattered. They had been people, real people, and she had felt nothing when they disappeared. That was the crime she would have to carry. That was the truth she would have to face. The judgment had reached the stars, and it was only beginning. The Galactic Conquered fell apart in the weeks that followed Moore's testimony. There was no dramatic announcement, no final vote to dissolve the alliance. It simply stopped functioning. Representatives returned to face questions they could not answer. Military leaders demanded solutions to a threat that could not be fought. Politicians blamed each other for crimes that had been committed by all of them together. The Empire was the first to run. High Commander Al ordered the evacuation of his people's core worlds within days of the assembly. He had seen the images that Moore projected. He had watched his own hands give the order to massacre the 7 colonists. He remembered laughing as his officers reported the death toll. Now that memory burned in his mind like a fire that would not go out. The fleet gathered at the edge of known space. 3,000 warships, loaded with as many citizens as they could carry, pointed their engines toward the galactic rim. Beyond the mapped regions lay the unknown, territories so distant that no species had ever explored them. Al believed that distance would protect them. If they traveled far enough, fast enough, surely even transcended humans could not follow. He was wrong. The fleet had been running for 17 days when a man appeared on the bridge of Al's flagship. The officers drew their weapons, but they had all seen what happened on Prime. They knew their guns were useless. The man was young, barely past 30 by human standards. He wore a uniform that Al recognized, the military dress of Earth's Marine Corps. His face was hard, marked by experiences that had made him old before his time. His eyes held no warmth at all. "My name is Danny Reeves," he said, "Corporal, 3rd Battalion, killed in action during what your historians call the frontier skirmishes. My unit was investigating reports of ships in the neutral zone. We found them. They found us. I watched my squad leader burn alive. I was captured along with 3 others. The things your interrogators did to us lasted for 9 days." Al's hands began to shake. He remembered authorizing those interrogations. He remembered the reports that came afterward. "You classified our deaths as a training accident. You told Earth's government that we had fired first. You started a conflict that killed thousands on both sides, all to hide what you had done. And when the war ended, you celebrated your victory with a feast." Danny walked toward the command throne where Al sat paralyzed. "I'm not here to kill you. Death is too quick, too easy. It ends suffering instead of teaching from it. I am here to make sure you understand exactly what you did. Every person you ordered killed, every family you destroyed, every child who grew up without a parent because of your ambition, you will feel what they felt. You will know what they knew, and you will carry that knowledge for the rest of your natural life." Danny placed his hand on Al's forehead. The High Commander screamed. It lasted only seconds by the ship's chronometer, but for Al it was an eternity. He experienced every death he had ever ordered. He was the colonist on 7, watching plasma fire descend. He was the prisoner in the interrogation chamber, feeling his body break. He was the child on Earth who received news that her father would not be coming home. He was hundreds of people, thousands of people, and he felt every moment of their suffering as if it were his own. When it ended, Al collapsed. He was alive. His body was unharmed, but something fundamental had broken inside him. He curled on the floor of his own bridge, weeping in a way that his species had never evolved to express, surrounded by officers who could only watch in horror. Danny Reeves addressed the entire ship through the communication system. "This is not extinction. This is accountability. Every who participated in crimes against humanity will receive the same gift your High Commander just received. You will understand what you did. That understanding is your sentence. What you do with it afterward is your choice." He turned to leave, then paused. "Some of you are innocent. Some of you were born after the silence and had no part in what came before. We know this. We see all of you as clearly as we see ourselves. The innocent have nothing to fear from us, but those who carry guilt, you will face it. That is the only justice we ask for." Danny vanished, and the fleet drifted in the darkness between stars, its leadership shattered, its people forced to confront the truth of their history. Across the galaxy, the reckoning spread. The scientists who had performed experiments on human prisoners found themselves experiencing their own procedures. They felt the needles, the chemicals, the cold examination of their most private thoughts. None of them died. All of them changed. On a dozen other worlds, military officers and political leaders faced the consequences of decisions they had made decades ago. No one was killed, but many wished they had been. The weight of true understanding was heavier than any punishment their justice systems could have delivered. They responded differently. They had already lost their weapons, their fleet, their ability to project power. Now they began a process of internal examination that would reshape their entire culture. General Orr, who had watched her armada dissolve, became one of the first to speak publicly about what her people had done wrong. She did not excuse herself. She did not minimize the suffering her species had caused. She simply acknowledged it and asked what could be done to make amends. The humans answered her. A woman named Lisa, who had been a diplomat before the silence, appeared before the governing council. She did not come to judge. She came to help. She shared memories of human history, the times when her own species had committed terrible acts and slowly learned to do better. She explained that growth was possible, that the past did not have to define the future, that choosing to be different was always within reach. "We did not transcend because we were perfect," Lisa told them. "We transcended because we kept trying despite our imperfections. We made mistakes, terrible mistakes. We hurt each other in ways that seemed unforgivable. But we also built hospitals. We wrote songs. We held our children and taught them to be better than we were. That is what made us worthy of what we became." They listened, and for the first time in their long history of conquest, they began to imagine a different way of being. The fleet eventually turned around. They had nowhere to run that the humans could not find them. Al spent the rest of his life working to undo the damage he had caused. He never fully recovered from his reckoning, but he used his remaining years to establish aid programs for species his people had wronged. When he died, old and exhausted but somehow at peace, his final words were an apology that no one was sure he had finished speaking. They disbanded their secret research programs, resigned her position and traveled to Earth, where she spent years walking through empty cities and trying to understand the people she had dismissed so easily. She learned their languages, studied their art, read their poetry. She sat for hours before the refrigerator in Kansas, looking at that drawing of a family beneath a yellow sun. She began to write, not reports, not diplomatic assessments, but stories. Stories about the humans she was learning to know through what they had left behind. Stories about their courage and their foolishness and their unbreakable determination to matter. When she finished her first book, she sent a copy into the void, hoping somehow that they would receive it. They did. A note appeared in her quarters the next morning, written in Moore's handwriting. "Thank you for seeing us. That is all we ever wanted." The choice had been given to the galaxy. Face the truth or continue the lie. Accept accountability or cling to comfortable ignorance. Every species, every individual had to decide for themselves. Most chose truth, not because they were forced to, not because they feared punishment, but because the humans had shown them something they had never expected: mercy without weakness, justice without cruelty, and the strange, impossible hope that even the worst mistakes could become the foundation for something better. The judgment had reached the stars, and slowly, painfully, beautifully, the galaxy began to heal. 5 years passed after the reckonings began. In the long history of the galaxy, 5 years was nothing, a blink, a breath, a moment too brief to notice. But in those 5 years, everything changed. The galactic conquered was gone, replaced by something new. They called it the Open Assembly, and it operated on principles that would have seemed absurd before the humans returned. No secrets, no hidden agendas. Every species had access to every other species' historical records, including the parts that showed them at their worst. Trust was built slowly, carefully, through the shared understanding that everyone had failed and everyone could grow. Earth became a monument world. No species claimed it. No one built on its empty cities or harvested its fields. Instead, it became a place of pilgrimage, a destination for anyone who wanted to understand the people who had lived there. They came by the thousands, veterans who needed to face the enemies they had been trained to hate, scientists seeking to understand the species they had treated as specimens, children who had grown up hearing stories about the humans and wanted to see for themselves what had been lost. They walked through streets where grass now grew between the cracks in pavement. They entered homes where dust had settled on furniture, where photographs showed smiling faces frozen in time. They sat in theaters and watched films that made them laugh and cry. They read books that challenged everything they thought they knew about what a young species could achieve. Had made the journey many times. The former ambassador had become something new, a historian, a translator, a bridge between what humanity had been and what the galaxy needed to understand. Her books about human culture were required reading in schools across a dozen worlds. She had learned to feel things she had not known were possible, and she had learned that feeling was not weakness but strength. On her latest visit to Earth, she returned to the house in Kansas. The drawing was still there on the refrigerator, faded now but still visible. The stick-figure family holding hands beneath the yellow sun. She understood it now. She understood what it meant to be part of a family, to love something greater than yourself, to hope for a tomorrow that you might not live to see. The humans had known these things from the beginning. They had carried this knowledge in their hearts through every struggle, every loss, every small moment of joy stolen from an uncaring universe. Touched the drawing gently and whispered an apology to people who had been gone for 35 years. She did not know if they heard. She hoped they did. A young woman named climbed a hill overlooking the ruins of what had once been her people's greatest military academy. The buildings had been abandoned after Ben Carter's visit. No one wanted to train for wars that could no longer be fought with weapons. Had been born after the reckoning. She had never known an empire that conquered and destroyed. She had grown up in a society that was learning, painfully and slowly, to define itself by what it created rather than what it took. But she carried questions that her parents and teachers could not answer. She sat on the grass and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, 8 billion humans existed in a form that no one could fully comprehend. They watched, they remembered, they waited. Were they angry? Did they hate the species that had celebrated their disappearance? Did they look down on the galaxy and see only the mistakes, or did they see the efforts to do better? Ask the questions aloud, not expecting an answer. The wind moved through the grass. The stars shone in their ancient patterns. The universe seemed very large and very quiet. Then a woman appeared beside her. She was older, perhaps 60 by human standards, with silver hair and a face lined by years of smiling. She wore a cardigan sweater and comfortable shoes, like someone who had just stepped away from a garden. "Hello," the woman said. "My name is Price. I was a librarian from Vermont. I loved books, terrible puns, and growing tomatoes that never quite turned out right." Should have been afraid. She had heard stories about the transcended humans, about their power and their judgment. But there was nothing frightening about this woman. She looked like someone's grandmother, kind and patient and genuinely happy to be there. "I heard your questions," said, settling onto the grass beside her. "I thought you deserved answers." Found her voice. "Do you hate us for what our people did?" Considered the question carefully. Hate requires distance. It requires seeing someone as less than yourself, as unworthy of understanding. We cannot do that anymore. We see you too clearly. Every thought, every fear, every small kindness and great cruelty. We know you as completely as we know ourselves. She picked a blade of grass and twirled it between her fingers, a gesture so ordinary that almost forgot she was talking to a being of impossible power. "Your great-grandmother gave an order that killed human colonists. She did it because she was afraid, because she was taught that fear should become violence. But she also once saved a child who had wandered into a war zone. She risked her life for a stranger from a species she was supposed to hate. Both of those truths exist in her. Both of them matter." Thought about her great-grandmother, a figure who had died before she was born, remembered now only as a name in family histories. She had never known that story. She wondered how many other stories had been lost. "We don't hate you," continued. "We cannot hate you. You are too complex, too full of contradictions, too achingly familiar. You remind us of ourselves before we became what we are now. We made the same mistakes. We carried the same fears. We hurt each other in the same ways." She looked at with eyes that seemed to hold all the warmth in the universe. The difference is that we got lucky. We met the architects before our worst tendencies could destroy us. You have to do it the hard way, the way we were doing it before we were lifted up. You have to choose every day to be better than you were yesterday. Felt tears on her face. She did not know why she was crying. What are we supposed to do now? Smiled, and for a moment saw something vast behind that simple expression. She saw the weight of billions of souls, the accumulated wisdom of a species that had lived and died and loved and lost and somehow, against all odds, kept going. You grow, said. You remember, you do better. That is all anyone can do. That is all we ever did. We were not special. We were not chosen. We were just stubborn enough to keep trying even when it seemed hopeless. And when we fell down, we got back up. Every time, for millions of years. She stood and offered her hand. The young took it and rose to her feet. The galaxy is yours now. Yours and all the other species who are learning to live together. We will watch. We will remember, but we will not rule you or guide you or make your choices for you. That was never what we wanted. We wanted neighbors, friends, fellow travelers on this strange journey through the universe. Began to fade, her form becoming transparent in the starlight. Be kind to each other. That is the only lesson that ever mattered. Everything else, the technology, the politics, the grand achievements and terrible failures, all of it comes down to whether you choose kindness or cruelty in the small moments that make up a life. She was almost gone now, a whisper of light against the darkness. We are proud of you, she said. All of you, you are doing better, we can see it, keep going. Then she was gone, and stood alone on the hill under the stars. But she was not lonely. She felt somehow that she would never truly be alone again. Somewhere beyond the visible light, beyond the limits of space and time, billions of human souls watched over a galaxy that was learning at last to be kind. The judgment had reached the stars, and it was not fire, not destruction, not the ending that the guilty had feared. It was a mirror. It was a chance. It was the strange and terrible and beautiful gift of seeing yourself clearly and deciding to become something better. Walked down the hill toward her home. She had work to do. She had a future to build. And she carried with her, like a light in the darkness, the memory of a librarian from Vermont who had believed that even the most broken things could heal. That was humanity's final gift to the galaxy. Not power, not punishment, just hope. And hope, it turned out, was enough.